Well, I was writing when I was 7 years old, so maybe that was a hint. I wrote little poems and tiny, silly little stories that I submitted to the Brooklyn Eagle. They had a special page in that paper called Aunt Jean's column or Aunt Jean's page, and they printed my poems there. I remember one line. When Columbus sailed, he said, "At least I'll find a short route to the east." I can't remember anymore.
That's great that you remember that. Did you go to public school in Brooklyn?
Yes, I did. Quite a few. We moved a lot. I don't know whether we couldn't pay the rent or what.
Oh.
But we lived in quite a few different places.
And I think I noticed that you went to Brooklyn Tech High School.
Yes, I did. I don't know why. I was very good at mathematics in grade school, and they let about, oh, I don't know, 5 or 6 of us go and take the special test to see if we could get into Brooklyn Tech. And I had the misfortune to pass the test.
You're not a fan of the Brooklyn Tech education?
Oh, it's a fine education. I'm not a fan of me going to such a school.
Oh.
I mean, I took structural engineering. But the only thing that it did for me is that it enabled me to learn how to print.
But it obviously kept your interest in science and things of that nature going, right?
Well,
Math.
That's possible. I never thought of that.
No? Because I always heard that was part of what the curriculum was there.
Yeah, it was a very impressive school. It was there were only 2 of them in the whole country.
And even having written as a 7-year-old, when do you think it kind of became clear to you that writing was something someone could do as an adult, even as a job, rather than just something that you did as a kid?
I'm not sure when I thought of it, because it never occurred to me that I could make money from it. Yeah. I wrote a novel when I was 14. It never occurred to me to try to submit it anywhere.
So what was the progression of discovering that maybe submitting something somewhere could make a career?
Well, I submitted a short story to the magazine of fantasy and science fiction after I got out of college when I was 23. And it sold and caused quite a stir. So that's when I earned the munificent sum of $25 for it. And I always loved movies, so I presume that I figured that eventually that's why I went to California. So it'd be near to motion pictures. I came when I was 25.
Yeah. I mean, the number of short stories that you wrote is incredible, but I know you didn't make a living just writing short stories. How did you kind of progress with figuring out?
Well, the first time I made any kind of money that had any kind of clout to it at all was when I wrote the novel The Shrinking Man, and sold it to Universal on the stipulation that I write the script. And that was the first time I realized, I guess, that you could make genuine money from writing. I had an agent in New York who I presently left because I wrote this novel, and he told me it would hurt his reputation if he submitted it, and that irritated me. So I went and got another agent who immediately sold the novel to Lippincott.
So once you had sold a script to Universal, sold a project to Universal, and you and your agent were smart enough to say that you wanted to write the script. Were you pushed, or did you want to push yourself, or how did you then begin writing more films?
Well, my New York agent made a connection with an agent out here, Malcolm Stewart, I believe it was, and he started submitting me to various programs, among which was the Twilight Zone.
I think that I understand that you probably wrote more Twilight Zones than any other.
No, Charles
writer.
Beaumont wrote most of them. He
Oh,
wrote
really?
about over 20 of them. I wrote 14.
I mean, that's pretty amazing, really. I mean, those episodes are still revered now, and
Yeah, it's very interesting. Well, they were well done.
Mm-hmm.
Because Rod Serling was in charge of the program. He saw to it that it maintained a quality, which it did.
Were you actually working on the show, like in what is today a staff position, or
No,
did you?
No. I just submitted
They were all freelance.
ideas, went in and discussed it with them, and they either said yes or no.
At the time that you were doing that, were you also still writing, like, your next novel, or more? You were.
Yeah, I never stopped writing prose. At least I sensed that was an entree, that most people in motion pictures were impressed if you had short stories and novels published too. To my memory, it was almost all freelance. Everything I did was freelance, speculative writing. I guess there were staffs, but they were very small. Once in a while, a writer I knew would become part of a staff, like Bob Block, I think, became part of a staff. But mostly it was you got an idea. Either you contacted them and went in to talk to them, or else, in the case of the Twilight Zone, because I had already had stories published in that genre. And genre is a word I hate. Because I had stories in that they contacted me and my friend Charles Beaumont, and we both went in and both became their head writers, only not on staff, however. Just because we caught on to the structure of Twilight Zone right away, which was not very complicated, but other writers didn't seem to be able to do it.
And who were you pitching to at that time?
Well, in Twilight Zone, I would pitch to both Rod Serling and Buck Houghton. And they would say yes or no. As I recall, there were some changes made in some of the scripts. I'm sure there were. I can't believe that they just accepted everything I did word for word, but sometimes I did an outline, although I don't remember. I don't remember writing outlines. They like the first thing I did for them, I said, I just said to them, a World War I pilot lands and finds himself in a contemporary airport base, and that was enough for them. I had to work out the details, but the idea, they trusted me, and the idea was unusual enough so that they were ready to go along with it. For the one that Bill Shatner was in on the airplane, I'm sure I told him that a man in an airplane sees something out on the wing. Then I had to figure out who the man was, what his problem was, and how to resolve it. I was usually able to do that.
But you're saying that they were not insistent on sitting and figuring that out with you?
No, never.
No.
Oh, they may have made suggestions. I'm sure they did, but They never imposed anything on me. I've had most success where the producer did not impose their limited sense of structure on me. I just accepted what I did.
Mm-hmm. And in the case of movies, did it work similarly?
Well, sort of. You know, when I worked for Roger Corman, what he did was he kept editing. And by the time I was finished and by the time they shot it or got ready to shoot, it was too short. I had to add pages.
Do you think that was for financial reasons that he made it so short?
No, I think it was just this. He was used to making movies that were like 75 minutes long, I guess. That was just the way his brain worked. He was very nice to work for, though. I mean, there are very few producers I have in mind who were very unpleasant to work with. Mostly they were very nice. I feel he was a very productive and rapid director. The only words I remember him saying is they do a shot, and he'd say, "We're on the wrong set," meaning let's move. I never saw him work with the actors. He may have, but I never saw it. He just, especially in the later films, he chose these old professionals, or they chose these old professionals, Boris Karloff, Peter Lorre, Vincent Price in particular, and they just knew how to do it.
Did you spend very much time on sets when you were doing either a movie or in the earlier days of television?
I did at first. You're usually very fascinated with the whole process when you're starting out. Then after a while you realize you're wasting a lot of time. You could be home writing. And it gets very boring. It takes them 2-3 hours to set up something that they shoot in 25 seconds. It's not worth the effort.
Could you describe for the writers who are going to be watching this any relationships with directors that you had that you remember in terms of were you able to talk to some about how you imagined a scene to be or something that was important to you in the script to get across or anything like that?
Only at the script stage, not during the shooting. I never interfered with the shooting. Mm-hmm. I might not have liked it, but I didn't interfere. Mm-hmm. Roger did a pretty good job. Unfortunately, he had a penchant for choosing performers who weren't that good. So you put Boris Karloff together, or Vincent Price in particular, with somebody less efficient, and they stand out. But the scene does not work that well.
I understand that you were on location for Somewhere in Time.
Yes, I was.
Where was that, and how did you happen to go on location?
Well, I had a very close relationship with the producer, whose name was Stephen Deutsch at the time. It's now Stephen Simon. And he fell in love with the book, and I did the script, and he and the director, Jean Swart, fell in love with the script. I remember going into the first staff meeting where there was a whole table full of people, and when I came in the room they applauded, and I was so impressed. And so I went. Steve wanted me to be on location during the shooting. Mm. And I even did some work there, especially for Christopher Plummer, who was sort of autocratic and had his own ideas. He came up with a pretty good idea, though. That's one of the projects that I think Jeannot Swark did a very nice job on it. It's in the working now, or has been now for some time, with some Broadway producer trying to make a musical out of it. I'm waiting to hear more on that. I mean, I think he finally has the composer that he likes. I co-wrote the book with him.
Oh, you've already done it?
Yeah, some time ago.
Oh.
Ken Davenport is his name. He was chosen as the producer of the year a couple of years ago. He's been very, very, very pleasant to work with. I have another play which has been going through an endless amount of twists and turns. It's a suspense play. It came closest to being done at the Globe Theater recently. And the reason it didn't go through is that they had lost so much money putting on a play about Sammy Davis Jr. that they didn't want to take a chance. So it's still in limbo somewhere. I chose to go into playwriting really at a very poor time in the economy. I'd have done better if I'd done it 10 years ago.
When you read about shows like Spider-Man or whatever that can waste millions and millions of dollars in such a short time, it's scary.
It is. It's a kind of story that is best confined to films, that they try to duplicate the special effects of the films on stage.
Right.
All they were doing was injuring their players.
Exactly. Oh, this is an interesting question. When you think back, can you identify a moment that you haven't mentioned yet in your writing career that was some sort of a decisive or peak moment where that made you decide to do something either differently or something you hadn't tried yet, or was there something that happened anywhere along the line?
Well, I ran across this book called Thinking in Destiny by Harold W. Percival. And I had spent a number of years evolving a metaphysical group of beliefs for myself by researching all over the place. And he had everything I had figured out, he already had in his book, plus a lot more. And I think maybe it made me decide to change my subject matter. I wrote a novel about what people refer to as life after death, called What Dreams May Come, which they made into a terrible movie. And Steve Deutsch, I worked with him for years. As a matter of fact, it was first optioned by the Lucille Ball Company. And I wrote the script, and they finally revised it and got an Australian director. What's interesting is that the man who wrote the script was very, very successful. I think he got several $1 million for it, which is a price I never got for a script. And I didn't like what he did, even though he kept claiming it's all Richard Matheson, and it wasn't. And the man who used to run Universal, Tom Pollak, told me one day, they should have shot your book. A little late in the day. I've had two moments like that. Another was James Nicholson, when they were shooting Desaad, which is a very good script I wrote. He said he was talking to John Huston, who was in the movie, and John Huston said, "Why didn't you ask me to direct it? I'd have been glad to direct it." A little late in the day. So those are little decisive moments of agony.
When you sit down to write a script, one of the things that people who come to the library to watch these interviews online are interested in is what your process is. And when you sit down to write a screenplay, or for that matter, any kind of writing, but a screenplay specifically, what is your usual way of working, if you have a usual way?
Well, I use the file card method. I will do research, and I will put down multiple ideas about character, scenes, ideas for the story, until I have, in one case, I had thousands of file cards when I was doing trying to do a 20-hour miniseries for ABC. I had cork boards on the walls of my office, and I had file cards pinned up all over. Whatever the gaps there were in the file card method, I wrote other file cards to fill the gap until I had an entire outline in file cards. If they wanted an outline, I would write one. I did for the 20-hour miniseries. It was like, it took me a year and a half, and I wrote about 800 pages. That was never done, never filmed. I have had a lot of experiences of writing a lot of material that was never made, much to my unhappiness.
Have you ever turned something like that into a novel?
I do it all the time. I just did it. I decided at a rather late date to try writing for the theater, and I wrote this long play, which several people have liked, and I decided to turn it into a novel. I'm waiting now. My agent just read it in New York and enjoyed it very much. But it's not really. I had a sheet of paper in the beginning that said, this book is a hybrid, part novel, part play, part biography.
Can you tell us a little bit about the kind of research that you do for a brand new project?
Well, whatever I've always been inclined toward fantasy. So the last novel I did that came out in March, Other Kingdoms, is called. I went to the Bodhi tree, and there were two books. One, quite a few of them about what they call the Middle Kingdom, which is, people snicker when they hear this about fairies, but they're a different breed than most people think. I did research for about a year on that, and then research for another novel about two men backpacking, one of whom goes after the other. And I decided that was more saleable.
That the one that came out this year?
No, that March? Came out a couple of years ago. Called To Live was my title.
Uh-huh.
Because that was the premise behind it. Despite the fact I've done a lot of writing, I don't have that much confidence in my own work.
Even today?
Yeah, even today. I'd like to believe in what I do, and every once in a while I will read something I've written and I think, oh, that's pretty good. But outside of that, I have no basic ego to deal with.
That must be very difficult when you have to sit in a room alone and continue to do what you're doing.
Well, when I'm writing, I don't think of it that way. I just go about my business. And sometimes at the end of the day, when I read what I've written, I'm very impressed.
Do you still keep up a pretty active schedule of writing?
Well, I do and I don't. When I'm writing, when I'm actually working on a project, I'm at it pretty constantly, as my wife will be glad to, or not glad to tell you. When I first got married, I was writing 7 days a week, and my wife was not too happy about it. Then I wrote 6 days a week. Now, I just do it when there's something to do, when there's something I want to write. Weeks might go by and I don't do anything. I used to work on a very regular basis, 3-4 hours a day. I don't do that anymore. But then I'm not a kid anymore either.
Do you tend to work in the same place every day when you're working? When you have a project that you're into, do you have one space?
Oh, I used to have an office. For a while there, I rented several places where I worked. Then I had the tack room in our stable turned into a little office. And I wrote quite a few things there. Now I have a mechanical chair that I sit in. Ever since I had a stroke, I don't type anymore. I used to type. I print all my current novels. I printed the whole thing, which is much to the distress of Diana Mullen, who does my typing. She has to use a magnifying glass to figure out what I wrote.
How have you felt over the years when someone else has adapted something that you've written?
I don't like it. Unless, I think once in a while, David Koepp did a very good job on my novel, A Stir of Echoes. So I was impressed by that. I've had much more success in television, but of course there are my scripts. I did a script for Duel, and that put Spielberg on the map. I did a very good script for Dick Van Dyke called The Morning After. I did, I think, a very good script for John Ritter about the writing of The Wizard of Oz, which is interesting. When I first came out here, I met all these writers, and they were all very much dedicated and enamored of the Oz books, which I had never read. I had to read The Wizard of Oz for the first time. I thought John Ritter did a wonderful job, though. And in television, especially on the Twilight Zone, and on a Western series called O Lawman, I had they turned out very successfully, I thought.
I think that the experience of writing short stories and books and even an original script is so different for most people than writing for television, where there are going to be 5 other people, if you're lucky, sometimes 10, telling you what you should change. And
I couldn't do that.
And you haven't had those experiences. Is that what you're saying?
Well, my son and I are having that experience now of people, executives in the business, who have ideas of what to do with my work. And we're still struggling with that. It used to be when I did a novel, I would get notes by some editors with comments. And in the last few novels, no, they never say anything. It's like Stephen King City, where every word he writes, they just print as is. This last one, Other Kingdoms, is the first time I've had a novel discussed and made changes according to what was said by the editor, which doesn't bother me. I mean, if the editor is an intelligent person and their comments are intelligent and observant, I'll go along with it.
Well, if it's somebody also that you've had a relationship with, You kind of know where they're coming from.
Yeah, I've had a few editors I've gotten along with very well. I had an agent for many years, Don Congdon, who was very helpful to me. He's the one that replaced the other agent who said that it would hurt his career if he submitted this novel, which was A Stir of Echoes.
And which was the novel that described your meeting your wife?
The first novel I wrote was something called Someone is Bleeding, in which the first chapter is like a step-by-step description of how we met on the beach. How I went to the beach and picked up the first, or attempted to pick up the first girl of my entire life. And it worked limitedly. I asked her what time it was, and she pointed at a clock in Santa Monica.
And that was kind of the end of the conversation.
Yeah, well, we got to know each other then later on. She's a remarkable person.
And I know that more than one of your children writes. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah, we couldn't stop him. Richard is extremely successful, as you know. You yourself have worked with him. They're shooting a series now called Chemistry, which he and Norman Steinberg created. Our younger son, Christian, he and his partner Ed Solomon did the two Bill and Ted movies. And also a movie called Mom and Dad Save the World, which was based on my wife and myself.
Did I read somewhere that your daughter writes as well?
Well, she's done more production work than anything else. She and her husband worked on Rugrats when they lived in Los Angeles. They worked for Disney in Vancouver and did some series about a musical group, the younger daughter of which is psychic. And then they did another series that they created called The Collector, which was a fantasy about a priest from the long ago Middle Ages who was forced to continue his existence and examine various people to see whether they're qualified to stay on earth, go to heaven, or go to hell. It was very well done.
How does it work when you and your son Richard work together? Do you feel like the senior partner, or are you co-equal partners?
It's a 50-50 deal. We have no problem creating stories. Sometimes when in the actual writing of the script, we may have a disagreement, but the structuring of a piece is done with great harmony. He is now a writer which I tell everybody that he's better than I am. And I think he is. He's written some really remarkable things.
Well, maybe writing talent is inherited.
Well, I hope so. It'd be nice to believe that.
You were talking about Rod Serling earlier. Do you feel that you had any mentors in the business when you came to California and you started in either television or film? Do you feel that you can look back and say that you had anybody that really gave you a leg up?
Not writers, producers maybe. I mean, Buck Houghton was very helpful. And the producer of Lawman, Jules Shermer, who had been a motion picture producer, he was very helpful to me and very, very, very kind.
Who was the leading actor in Lawman?
John, I don't know, I think of him as the Golem. He was so rigid John Russell, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, well, then there was Peter Brown, who was his deputy. They worked together very well. And Jules Schremer always got the best directors, the best cameramen, and very good guest stars, because he's been a movie producer.
So a lot of actors knew him from film producing.
I guess so,
Yeah.
I guess so, because it certainly worked that way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I could have ever worked on staff. I was invited to be a producer several times, but I knew I couldn't do it. And as far as directing, I would either become a complete washout or I would become a Nazi and berate and be very unkind to my performers. And I didn't want to do that.
Why do you say you don't think you could have been on staff, though, as a writer?
Because I'm used to writing by myself. I mean, I can write with my son, but that's about it.
Are there any shows currently on television that you watch?
Oh, oddly enough, my wife and I are very dedicated to watching shows after they're canceled. We watch Frasier all the time, which is a marvelous show.
Right.
We watch Cheers. We used to watch Mary Tyler Moore. We used to watch Taxi after they were canceled, because you could watch them 5 nights a week rather than one night every week.
It's interesting that you named all comedies, not an area that people immediately think of you in or for. But that sounds like something that you really enjoy. When you're not writing yourself, you would rather watch a good comedy.
Well, I have written humorous stuff too,
Yeah.
and I enjoy it. I just wrote a short story which I think is very funny, called My Conversation with Superman. No, I enjoy comedy very much. I always have. It just happens that these shows I mentioned happen to have real quality to them. Other shows don't. I mean, in the old days, there was a period when Westerns were all the vogue, of which I wrote 6 of them with Lawman. Now they show them in retrospectives.
What was the last movie that you really enjoyed?
Well, I like Chicago very much. We would watch that over and over several times.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliantly done in every way. King Species was a wonderful movie.
It was. You know, I wanted to ask you one other question from the beginning about your family. Was your family, specifically your parents, supportive of you wanting to be a writer as a profession?
Well, I've always maintained that my family did not discourage me, but they did not encourage me either. Mm-hmm. I sort of did it all on my own. Mm-hmm. My brother was the only one, and a cousin I had, who encouraged me. When I was a little kid, I read these books called the Red Fairy books, with all these great fairy tales. The Red Fairy book, the Blue Fairy book, the Orange Fairy book, the Green Fairy book. They were all big anthologies. And I read them all. I mean, I had nobody said, hey, you shouldn't read that. What you should be reading is H.P. Lovecraft, or you should be reading Charles Dickens. I had no guidance toward what I read. When my friend Chuck Beaumont did The Wonderful World of the Brothers Grimm for George Powell, he had me read some of the Grimm fairy tales, and they were just ghastly. I had no idea how ghastly they were. Even when I read the Wizard of Oz, the lion goes out and kills things, at night. Not Bert Lahr at all. More like the Wolfman. I read anything I could lay my hands on. I thought John Cheever was a wonderful craftsman. There was a book I read, I had no idea what it was called or who wrote it. And the whole thing was just a man on a raft going across the ocean, finally landing on this island. And the author just stayed with him through old age on this island. And the writing was just exquisite. And I don't remember anything else about it, except that I was very impressed. And of course, when I first began to write commercially, Bradbury was the one who inspired all of us, because he was so unique. Everything he did was remarkable. Theodore Sturgeon was another writer who was awfully good. And there were several other writers who were really outstanding. Kenneth Roberts, who wrote Northwest Passage and a number of novels about the Revolutionary War. Oliver Wiswell. I read all his books. They were all 1,300 pages. I would read one every week. I read Gone with the Wind when I was like 15 years old, when the movie first came out. I just absorbed it all. How it affected my work, I have no idea.
I have one other question about your side career in horror. What led you down that path?
I mean, I remember watching the Val Lewton movies, The Cat People, Body Snatcher. I don't know why. Matter of fact, I wrote him a letter. I told him how much I liked the pictures he did. And I told him that I had figured out several ways he had of scaring people. One of which is to lead the camera all the way to the right and then have something jumping out of the left. Pretty obvious. The other one was long periods of total silence, broken by anything, a horse nickering, a bus stopping, anything that makes you jump out of your skin. I mean, in my Twilight Zone, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, there's a scene where Bill Chatham slowly goes over to the curtain and whips it open, and there's this creature right there, pressed up against the window, looking at him. And everybody thought, well, gee, what an original idea. It wasn't original at all. It's a pretty obvious thing to do. I don't know why they thought it was so clever. My wife wonders why I enjoy it at all. If it's well done. I thought Rosemary's Baby was a wonderful movie. Matter of fact, I almost had that job. And then William Castle said, well, I've hired, what's his name, the director?
Roman Polanski.
Yeah, and he said that he will do the script. It didn't bother me at all because I knew he'd do a good job, and he did a wonderful job. So the fact that I lost that assignment did not break my heart. I admire great talent. I have a great respect for talent. The original version of The Haunting, based on Shirley Jackson's book that Robert Wise directed, that was brilliantly done. When they redid it, they just threw everything but the kitchen sink in it, and it didn't work at all. There's an art to frightening people, to do it successfully, do it without schlock. It's not that easy, but when it's done right. One of my Twilight Zones with Gladys Cooper, I thought was very scary. And it was very simple. There were no ghosts, no goblins, no vampires, no zombies or anything. I keep waiting for them to do my book, I Am Legend. They've done it 3 times and they haven't done it yet. As I said, David Koepp did a very nice job on A Stir of Echoes.
Mm.
He wrote it and he directed it. It was very nice.
Well, it's good that you're willing to give credit when you think something is well done. That's nice.
Oh, I admire it very much.
Yeah.
I was watching the other night, they re-showed a script I'd written called The Legend of Hell House, which I remembered as not being too fond of, but I thought it was pretty good. And done intelligently.
Mm-hmm.
And with some subtlety.
Yeah.
That's really what it all comes down to. And as far as what young writers should do, they should write what they want to write. You will know, if you're a true writer, you will know in yourself what you want to write, and you must do that. You must pay attention to your inner voice. You can't let other people tell you you should write this, you should write that, you should write more commercially if you want to be a success. I think that you just do the best you can, and eventually, if you're really good, it'll be worth some money anyway. I mean, I'm 85 now, and I'm just now starting to make some money.